Well, it's fake news. You know, it's so fake. That's why the media has so little credibility.
Українці, шановні захисники, бути президентом виявилося не так вже й легко.
Meta takes down deepfake of Ukraine's President Zelensky surrendering. Oh my God, jeez.
That's so freaky.
In 1939, there was breaking news. Little Martians had landed in New Jersey. It caused panic throughout the streets of New York, and CBS radio became inundated with calls from concerned listeners about the imminent alien invasion.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a grave announcement to make. Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars.
We know now that that was all the masterwork of Orson Welles, broadcasting live to an audience that was susceptible to the news they were listening from a trusted news source. But the consequences were still very real, even if the story was not.
The airing of the War of the Worlds that caused panic was one instance on one platform. Imagine a world now where you have the entire internet and you can reach the whole population. What kind of disruption and panic could you create? That's what we're seeing now in the world of misinformation and disinformation deepfakes. Whereas the War of the Worlds was a creative, if slightly disruptive, piece of storytelling, now such fakery is being used not only to change what we think, what we feel, but also the political and cultural landscape around us. Welcome back to How Technology Ruined Your Life, our series about the human consequences of technology and what they mean for cybersecurity. In the previous episode, The Persuasion Machine, we looked at what happens when AI learns how to change your mind.
And today we're looking at what happens when it can manufacture the evidence it needs to do it.
Fake photographs, fake witnesses, fake news reports, fake experts, fake phone calls, fake colleagues, fake everything. And an internet increasingly filled with synthetic material designed not necessarily to inform you, but to simply make you stop scrolling or take some kind of nefarious action.
We're calling this episode F is for Fake, which also happens to be the title for a Orson Welles documentary starring the man himself, in which he explores the idea of fakery through modern art and forgeries. Whereas he's discussing the quandary of, are fakes valid for art form? We're going to be looking at whether the central question is not if AI can simply make us believe something is false, it's whether its existence of convincing fakes will eventually make us stop believing in anything at all. So why are we talking about fakes on a cybersecurity podcast?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of cybersecurity angle to the idea that people can spoof things. We've already seen cases that are being actually quite well reported in the media. Things like there was not so long ago, about a year or so ago, there was a case in Hong Kong where I think it was 400 million Hong Kong dollars were stolen because somebody had used deepfake technology to impersonate executives during an exec call and got the financial director to transfer an awful lot of money to somewhere they shouldn't have done. We're also seeing it in things like other kinds of scams with voices, phishing. We're also seeing it being able to fabricate other evidence supporting social engineering, and also seeing it being used to create synthetic or at least deepfakes for employees to act from maybe unfriendly nation states or people who don't have a right to work in that organization, presenting themselves as somebody who's not. And I think this is the only kind of the tip of the iceberg on this, because this technology is getting more and more advanced. Our ability to spot it is not getting as advanced.
But Jeff, I'm a cybersecurity person. I've got firewalls to deal with. I've got to stop people clicking on phishing links. Why has misinformation, disinformation, deepfake, why should that land on my doorstep?
Personally, I think some of it needs to land on everybody's doorstep. There's general awareness, but as a cybersecurity team, I feel like who else is better? The people who should be skeptical and should be effectively holding the reins on how this kind of information flows through systems and through a company. I think if nobody else will take an interest in it, then we're lost. So cybersecurity, I think, unfortunately, in the absence of anybody else, should be really, really interested in the effects of deep fakery, misinformation, disinformation, and how it could affect organizations.
I mean, I guess our natural proclivities for paranoia probably really help in that respect.
Yeah, quite right.
Our very much X-Files trust no one approach to the organization.
I think it's probably worth, though, before we go too far into the topic, like putting a few definitions out there, because I think it's all got a little bit muddy. So, I mean, first of all, deep fakery. People think, oh, is that just faking video? Is that just faking a voice? And I think it's almost a slightly unhelpful term, because fakery has existed for a very long time. We've been able to composite images people have composited images since since the start of things like photography. People have created collages of images and used photographic manipulation for a very long time.
I always like the example that comes with about propaganda as well. Stalin stood next to his advisors, and then a few years later, it's just Stalin stood on his own.
Yeah, just gradual disappearance. So things like photoshopping, voice faking, impersonation existed for a long time.
Do you know why it's called deep faking?
Well, so we can get to that. I believe it's because it's using deep learning techniques to actually
Okay, that makes sense.
to actually, so deep learning, so basically for the most part neural net, because this level of technology is required to create things like what we're seeing now, things like real-time overlays of people, where you can actually see people in things like job interviews or on webcams looking like somebody completely different in real time, and you've got all this incredible ability to track motion. You can even pull your own skin on your face, and I could appear as maybe, say, like somebody completely I'm not. I could appear as a famous person. I could appear as Arnold Schwarzenegger, for example.
Well, that seems like a really nice segue. If this was the one show to our British listeners, just a little shout out. We did cover deepfakes in our sister podcast, Tech Film Noir, through the Running Man, which has a fantastic deepfake scene in there. There's no spoilers there. So after you've listened to this, do go check that episode out. We'll put it in the show notes. Just because you mentioned Arnold Schwarzenegger there, Jeff. And I was like, yeah.
Smooth. It's almost like intended it. But then we've also got misinformation and disinformation, and they require a little bit of explanation, because misinformation, disinformation have existed for thousands of years. There's coins printed from the Roman times with disinformation campaigns on them.
But there is a very key difference, isn't there, between the two?
Yes. Yeah. So misinformation is incorrect information spread that's not necessarily, the intent is not necessarily to deceive people, and it might just be wrong. So you see lots of people spreading stuff online that's wrong. And then disinformation is, by modern definitions, the intentional spreading of information that is incorrect or in some way subversive or manipulative to make people, in some way, to change people's minds or make people take action, and it's knowingly manipulative or wrong. And unfortunately, what happens is disinformation gets laundered through other people into misinformation, because I create some disinformation and then somebody reposts it thinking it's true, then actually it's kind of become misinformation by association, by laundering through other channels. And then we have malinformation, which is the use of ostensibly the truth, but using framing, deceptive framing, to actually make a certain point, or to potentially to deceive people, or potentially to make people take action. And all of these ideas about fakery and misinformation, disinformation, all of them are really new concepts. It's just now in an AI world where, as we can see by some of the academic papers, which we will link in the show notes, we're now at the point where we can't really tell whether, at least upon first glance, upon initial inspection, humans can no longer tell if they're talking to a machine or to a person, or if what they're looking at is fake or is real, and which is kind of disturbing. Now, it's not. There's arguments in these papers that say, well, actually, this is almost like a little bit of a kind of moral panic. It's a satanic panic of the AI era, because we've long since been in a world where there's been fakery. Ever since Hollywood has existed, it's all of it's built on suspending of disbelief.
Yeah, but Hollywood, you go there to be entertained. But I think the issue nowadays is having your senses absolutely bombarded, saturated even, constantly. Like, I was on X the other day. Yes, listeners, for some reason I'm still drawn to it. I do need to get off it. And the reason why I need to get off it, actually, is because when I was last on it, everything on there was synthetic media. There was almost nothing on there. I felt like maybe I was the only human actually having eyeballs on this platform. It was that bad. And to me, it made for a boring couple of minutes scrolling. And actually just left the platform, just because I was just like, well, there's nothing real on here. It's all fake. Loads of fake videos, loads of fake content farms and things like that. Really not worth the time and effort. And I can imagine after time, if all platforms become this. I mean, I hear that LinkedIn, for example, has the most AI-generated content of any social media platform, which I find crazy compared to things like TikTok and things like and Instagram. But apparently so.
I imagine it's probably the medium, because almost everybody's using AI to write their posts. Oh, sorry, not almost everybody. everybody. A good portion of people are using AI to write their posts for them nowadays. And you can tell broadly, I mean, and to be fair, they're kind of pushing that themselves as a paid for feature. So it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And up until recently, we haven't really had the ability to create so much synthetic content. And on its own, I think it feels a bit self-defeating, because if eventually we get so much slop that drowns out the real content, will people just move platforms? But I think there's the worry from a cybersecurity angle is what does this do to trust and to reality and to things like radicalization of people?
Well, the problem is these platforms kind of encourage it, right? The reason why it's blown up is because there's money to be made. So the papers you provided, again, listeners will provide them in the show notes. Some of the papers you provided for this episode really went into detail how it's very financially incentivized, because the algorithm likes this mass media content that's not very creative, sometimes a little bit bizarre, but and often has been used bluntly in a way that kind of stirs up emotions. But one thing I wanted to kind of mention, bringing it back to sort of cyber, is, are you familiar with the AAA framework in cyber? But for listeners that are not, so the AAA framework is authentication, authorization, and accounting. Now, when you were talking about things like deepfakes, and particularly in the context of organizations, the story you shared about the individual who transferred loads of money because he thought the CEO asked for the bank transfer, how do we authenticate a person if deepfakes are getting so convincing?
Well, and additionally to that, I think that AI is going to is already talking about it being able to sidestep things like biometrics reliably as well. So voice cloning, I know banking apps, some of them, make you say, this is.
It was at this moment that he knew he fucked up.
I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. No, I'm not going to say it. Oh, almost. But certain phrases that could be used for voice recognition, when voice cloning gets sufficiently good, that is no longer probably going to be an option, because people will street.
I know a lot of there's a lot of people I know that have actually requested their bank remove that as an authentication method now, because they don't trust it anymore. And I've not seen any bank. Maybe they do have. Maybe they can adequately spot it, but I've not seen any bank say we're turning this off, or even to the contrary say our means for detecting voice simulations are good enough to know when it's actually a person and when it's not. It's a recording.
Yeah. So we've seen demonstrations that show that machines' ability to detect AI generated content, be that text, be that video, be that audio, is patchy at best. And this technology is moving so quickly that I would not be very surprised if some of these methods almost think about the multi-factors, something something you own, something you have, something you are. When will the something you are, how do we protect the something you are? Because we can't protect the something you know.
It's going to have to be in blood, isn't it? It's going to have to be like... the future of passkeys is, you plug it into, it's like USB stick, you plug it in there, except it's got a little kind of dish. You do a little pin prick and you drop the little drop of blood in there, and then it lets you into your laptop. There you go, I've solved it. Something you are. OB negative.
Tell you what, it would certainly make you think about how often you log onto your banking platform, wouldn't it? I think it's a real challenge to things like authenticated multi-factor authentication, and both human and machine, because humans. So one of the papers we read in preparation for this talking about, and I think the title is something like "No Better Than a Coin Toss." So humans now asked to look at various types of AI-generated media and real media, asked to judge it, is it AI-generated or is it real? And there's a mixture of visual and audio-visual, and averaged out across the various different tests, across the different demographics, we have found that maybe some of the older generations are actually, unfortunately, worse at spotting these kind of issues. It was about 51% was a success rate, so basically not significantly better than coin toss. So unfortunately, that means that now already us humans are not reliable at spotting AI. My hypothesis is that unfortunately defensive technologies for spotting AI also will not be sufficient. So we need to do the...
that brings me up to my next question, which is part of the AAA, as I say, is authentication. So proving identity, authorization, about granting permissions, and then accounting. It's that repudiation piece, it's that audit trail, it's that logging piece. What you were just discussing then, it seems like a lot of the onus is on the individual. We need to teach you how to spot this. We need to give you good AI, synthetic media literacy, yada, yada, yada. Again, passing that on to the individual. But There are pieces of work that groups are doing, organizations are doing about verifying deepfakes, aren't they? How are they going?
Yeah, well, there's a content verification, which I guess is the other thing is if you can't necessarily spot a fake, can you verify what you know is real? Can you provide a
Yeah, because
certificate of authenticity for something?
if we're saying cybersecurity people need to be concerned about this, then surely if they're part of that 50% that are not going to be able to spot AI content as well. So what kind of tooling and techniques are in place to be able to spot this stuff?
Sure. There is the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, or the C2PA. They created a standard stroke core protocol a while ago. And that basically aims to, just like you'd have other digital signatures, basically provenance signals for how digital media is created and how it's being modified. And the idea is it attaches machine verifiable metadata to things. Now, you might have seen this already, dear listener, if you've seen a picture and it has a little kind of logo in the corner, and that logo in the corner specifies whether or not it's AI generated or not. And
You mean that little logo that I can very easily remove in Canva?
well, yes, quite. Yeah. So you get these content credentials. Now, so I think the use for this actually, obviously there's use for watermarking and things like that of AI content, but also for that something is genuine. Now, unfortunately, so there's some good papers on this on the C2PA specification, but also one of the key papers that for this episode is the fact that unfortunately this specification falls quite short. They've shown with some very basic effort they were able to things like change the metadata, things like change the date something was created, and basically it's not a complete solution in itself.
What struck me about that paper was how easy it is to bypass. So it works like your standard website certificate setup. You have a trusted certificate that says you are who you say you are, and then you don't get flagged by search engines or the antivirus for being a dodgy website. It works on that sort of similar process. But reading that article, it looks like the whole system into this verification process is voluntary, and as we all know, if something is voluntary, the uptick is never really great on that. It also sounds like it's a little bit unloved because those certificates that I'm talking about that do get issued to say, yes, this is a genuine piece of content, or even labeling it, yes, this is an AI piece of content, but AI for instance. Remember, AI can be used for good too. Those certificates do expire, and so the paper you're referring to did show that when they've gone back and looked at things that have received a certificate to say it's AI generated or not, it comes up with an error message saying that certificate is now expired. So,
well, worse still, I don't think it properly implements certificate revocation. So if somebody steals a certificate that's current, then they can certify something as being genuine. Which is a problem. So I think we've got some movements in the direction of travel of thinking about how we provide some provenance tracking of a piece of media, but it's imperfect. You can mess with the metadata and it doesn't deal with certificate revocation or expiry very elegantly. So I feel like we're definitely not there with that one yet, and it's definitely a work in progress. And it just leaves us in a little bit of a quandary because we don't have a reliable way of saying what's true, which in itself is like, I think, philosophically kind of a little bit of a weird thing anyway. And we don't have any way of really reliably saying what isn't true. And I guess the question is, outside of things like where it really matters, like authentication and making people take actions, like how much does it matter? But also there were some interesting questions in the paper. So what should count as AI generated when you're talking about when you label something as AI content or not? Because some people point out that modern cameras use AI for their things like the autofocus. And modern cameras, you look at modern cameras now, do things like that head replace where you take like 5 shots and it takes the best composites, the best shots of them all.
I could have really done with that when I was a wedding photographer. I had to do it all manual, but I did it in Photoshop. I had to do it all, Lightroom. I'm going to be specific for you tech nerds out there. But so there, it's nothing new, the idea of faking things. But I think that the problem I have with something like the C2PA, the context in which we consume things now, like a tiny mobile phone screen, relatively tiny mobile phone screen, while you're scrolling, while you're probably distracted, in an age where our attention span is short, am I going to be looking for a big label, a big watermark? Not really. And are people going to want that on their content? Because there's a lot of backlash of, again, people hate AI slop. One of the papers did say that there is a slight punk movement that embraces AI slop. I wonder if AI slop's going to be a bit like kitsch. In like 15 years time, we're going to look at these AI generated images and it's going to be like, oh, that's so kitsch and actually quite cool again.
It's already happening because people really love like really cursed AI images. There's that one about saying AI is going to take design jobs, and then it says AI taking the job, and it's like loads of really cursed handshakes where it's just two floating hands with 10 fingers. And already people miss those days where AI did really cursed stuff. And I agree. I think that there's a place in AI for art. There's a place in AI for content because it can do really weird cursed things. But we've even seen in adverts. We've even seen adverts where you go, hang on a second, is this entire advert from, well, I'm not going to name the names of these companies, but the big companies, like, this is all just really kind of vaguely cursed, uncanny valley AI generated nonsense, isn't it?
Yeah. And I'm all for the democratization of being able to express themselves, creating generated images, but I still think there's a lot to be said about the creative process there. Going back to that is consuming all this slop at speed. The problem is when you are exposed to a very convincing deepfake or a piece of misinformation, even if you are told, and several papers cite this, even if you are told it's fake, that does not erase the emotional effect it had on you and the psychological change it could potentially have on you. Because even if you are told something is not real, if you have seen it and it created an emotional response in you, and a good example I came across today was people in Gaza crying. There was deep fake that was going around of people in Gaza crying with joy at the fall of their leader, which was all deep faked. None of it was real. However, people viewing that saw that, and that emotional response is very real. So we have this thing of the images are fake, but the emotions, because we're the human beings, are very real. And what does that do to society if we are constantly having our emotions played on in such a way? Basically, what happens is it creates distrust, because if you cannot, after a while, and it's getting that way now, is if you see something maybe you don't agree with, or something that seems implausible or anything like that, or maybe even goes against your views, you could just cite it away and say, hey, it's just a deep fake image. So what happens when we don't trust what we're seeing?
And that's the other thing that enables the liar's dividend, because you could be caught doing something unsavory now and just say, yeah, that's just fake. That's fake news. Didn't happen. Because now the fakery is now so realistic, and it does put attention on what people believe and what people are willing to consume. I think it's interesting times, and there are some arguments that actually this really doesn't matter as much as it does. But I'm worried about. I am definitely worried about what effect it will have on people.
The problem is, if by intent or by accident a trusted source shares a deepfake, then their credibility is lost.
Yeah,
right?
It just happened already.
Yeah, for example, in the UK we have the BBC. It prides itself on being trustworthy. However, it's in a lawsuit with Donald Trump because it suggested that it did alter images about his rally and things like that, and that erodes trust. And I think the trust in the BBC is it's one of its all-time lows at the moment, and that has in some part to play due to the consequences of that. So who do we trust? That's the old age cybersecurity question, isn't it? It's all about trust. I guess that's probably why it's all connected.
Going back to the what's the famous Russian idiom, which I can't remember the actual Russian for, but trust but verify. And at the moment, linking back to the C2PA, verification's hard to come by. So the information ecosystem, your example of website certificates is a good one because it relies entirely on a chain of trust. Because we've had incidents in the past where a root CA has been compromised, and the kind of splash damage from a root CA being compromised is huge.
I can't quite remember, but didn't that happen with Gmail years and years and years ago? And it meant that hackers were able to hack into kind of famous journalists' emails.
Right. I don't remember that.
Very convincing.
I don't remember that, but I know. I think there was one of the big CAs literally had to shut down because they got exploited, and then they shut down the entire CA and had to revoke all the certificates. And as we mentioned before, unfortunately, certificate revocation isn't necessarily always the first thing that people implement. So that we're going to need to build up some kind of chain of trust globally when it comes to if we're using any kind of content. And when I say content, that doesn't mean TikTok stuff. I mean, like if we're using video calls, if you're using audio, if you're using text, to say is something coming from a trusted source or not. Now, whether or not something's true or not is a different matter, and it's like super, I guess, philosophically dubious. When we now say, oh, don't write using AI. Good luck not writing any. Almost all tools have it built in now. In some way, shape, or form. It's more like, did it come from me? Did it come from you? The non-repudiation element, because one of the other things about, I guess, that's the darker side to deepfake is also things like manufacturing blackmail material, because that allows people to create insider threats. And there's a potential for market manipulation as well, and things like that. There's a huge potential for fake for synthetic media to have a huge damage. And of course, when it comes to things like creating blackmail material on people, unfortunately, one of the other dangers of all this, and it's slightly outside the cybersecurity realm, but it's very important, is the fact that most of this disproportionately disadvantages women as well.
When does it not?
Yeah, I know. Sadly, yeah, the case. But when it comes to materials that could be used to damage somebody's reputation, a lot of it, unfortunately, does disproportionately disadvantage women. And the thing is, we can't.
We should say in mostly in deepfake pornography in that sense.
Yes, yeah, which is pretty damaging. But the problem is, and then some people say, oh, we should stop people from being able to create deepfakes, and that shows it was like people and say, oh, we should stop people using cryptography, or we should put backdoors in cryptography. Shows a slight naivety of how far this technology has spread, and basically we can't put the genie back in the bottle on any of this. You have to move effectively. This is a fixed forward situation.
Unless you speak to the UK government when they believe you can have a backdoor into it. So it's all safe and secure.
Yes. Well, less said about that, the better. So basically being in a slightly, I think, uncomfortable situation where there's material that shouldn't be generated, that's probably dishonest in some way and downright despicable in others. We can't stop it from being produced. We can't reliably detect it. And even our authentication methods for what is real are also somewhat patchy. So I think we're in a kind of a liminal space now where this is all becoming super relevant, and will become more relevant for organizations when these technologies start to be deployed more against them in anger.
So I guess one of the things we need to consider from a cybersecurity perspective is we're actually I suppose good is an interesting word. It does vary from organization to organization, but we are very conscious about things like obviously phishing, whaling as well, which is a very targeted form of phishing. I guess things like scams that get you to do things that you wouldn't normally do because they look convincing, like for your earlier example, the true story of the CEO appearing on a video call that's not actually the CEO. So I guess what I'm getting at is we already know about social engineering techniques, and they're obviously going to be utilized by criminal entities that will leverage deepfake technology. Can you foresee a situation where an adversarial person would utilize things like disinformation and misinformation to infiltrate a organization, for example?
Oh, no doubt. And I think also in combination with that, not just around the deepfake technology, but the advances in AI technology for powers of OSINT as well. It's getting, as we're living more and more online, and there's more and more breaches, and there's more and more recordings of people out there, OSINT and these kind of technologies are enabling better OSINT and the ability to clone people easier. And I think things like misinformation and disinformation could be used as vectors into organizations. Imagine a situation where you could put press releases out there that you started working with a particular company, and that the particular company now starts invoicing you and starts trying to activate accounts with you. And there's loads and loads of material out there saying, we've started working with company X, and it's all just made up. It's all just nonsense. I think there's loads of the combination of all these techniques could lead to some really innovative kinds of attacks that are quite sophisticated, but also kind of simplified by the fact that all of this technology is now available to us at pretty low price, with pretty low barrier of entry. Stuff that would have been just far too sophisticated and expensive to do manually or semi-automated like 5 or 6 years ago. Some of the problem with all of this as well is the fact that we're creating a bad seagull to noise ratio, if you see what I mean. There's so many deepfake attacks, so much slop created, so many people creating fake organizations, fake products, that this could put further pressure on cybersecurity teams as well. I think just the increase in the ability to use endless synthetic generated content to hammer away at reality. I wonder what effect that is going to have on teams. Will they in turn need better tooling to actually help protect against that, to actually help make sense of it all.
We're all going to be sent back to the office. That's what it is. No more no more remote working, because that's the only way we can verify. Apart from obviously my fantastic idea of the USB blood drips.
Yeah, it is a tricky thing. I mean, the main thing is, and the thing is, we've even seen recently problems with other channels such as Teams with some interesting workarounds that people have used. So even existing channels, people need to be kind of careful of. So
Well, you did some sanctioned deepfaking, didn't you, of a client of yours who requested it for a meeting? How easy was it for you to do?
Oh, just to be clear, we didn't deepfake the client. I deepfaked myself as a demo to see whether or not the client would be interested in being deepfaked.
For education awareness purposes, right? It's not just for not like you had a client who was just like, I need you to deepfake me so I can go cause some havoc in this organization.
No, this was for some AI education piece. So it was literally a 4.5 minute long recording of myself, just done using a gimbal camera handheld. And it took a few hours to process on the platform that I used, and it created a very realistic agent that was able to converse, and you could even give it some pre-canned information, things like that, but it could also converse naturally. And this is this is just something you can go off effectively a turnkey solution. You can just go today and spend $40 on, or in some cases, a free trial. And this technology is the worst it'll ever be. So we have got a situation where, as we said before, the papers have already shown humans now cannot really tell the difference. I think we might have another lag yet before maybe I could deepfake myself, or somebody could deepfake me so convincingly that somebody who knows me really well could be on a video call with me and go, "Oh, actually, that isn't Jeff. I think, or that is Jeff." I think we're probably maybe got, I don't know, maybe a year or two before that is so convincing that we will need to almost have, when the old spy movies where they have the red scrambler phone, where we absolutely need to make sure that somebody who's connected is who they say they are.
No, that sounds really old-fashioned.
Well, spy movies where it's like, we can't take this over a normal phone. It has to be over the secured scrambler line. And he picks up another phone. And
I thought they just went to like phone boxes. My childlike brain, when I was a kid, I always just thought phone boxes were the most secure places to be because that's where everyone went.
Let's just talk between like leaders of governments and things like that. It's the go to the red scrambler phone and making sure you've got a secure line. So we'll need to, because at the moment people on video calls tend to just let anybody in. It's like, somebody from gmail.com has joined the call. I'll just let them in. I think we will have, some of those things will have to be a thing of the past. We'll have to be very careful about who we let onto our corporate video calls and phone calls and Slack channels. And we'll need to be very, very, I think we'll need to have better control over ingress into the platform. That might mean, as some companies do, they only give out the ability to do things like your MFA on site in person. As in, the first point of contact has to be, almost like you have to be pressing flesh and going, right, this person's real. Therefore, we're going to give them the cryptographic ability to sign into the VPN or onto the meeting platform or whatever it is, because doing it online at the moment feels over like a virtual call where we go, hey, I'm Jeff. I'm definitely not deepfake Jeff. That doesn't feel like that's got a lot of time left, because there has to be a trust point where you enter into the system. And if at no point electronically can that trust point happen, it feels like, unfortunately, it has to be done in person. They have to press some flesh and go, right, okay, I'm definitely who I say I am. Which is unless we all just all of our lives get into the blockchain.
Oh, I can't imagine that. Eventually, a part of the onboarding process is that you need to hug your manager just to kind of prove that you're a human being.
Exchange some DNA to be sure. But I mean, it does.
Yeah, that sounds like a proper HR issue right there.
It does loop back to some of the other things that people have been trying with things like self-sovereign identity and cryptographic identity, and unfortunately, things like talking about the thing that's scrapped recently or is being scrapped, the idea, things like a national identity, digital identity. At some point, will we need to have some kind of identity that is? I mean, we've tried. There are some existing things where people try to do this. Some almost like identity that is you own an identity, but it is carried somewhere, and it is verifiable on things like the blockchain using zero knowledge proofs or other cryptographic mechanisms to go, actually, I am the Jeff who I say I am, or you are the Leanne who you say you are, and I only trust we're on a call today. I trust the or you.
I hardly know these days, to be honest, Jeff. I hardly know if I am the Leanne I say I am.
But I think in the interim, like security teams are going to have to be, I think there's going to be a lot of increase in people asking for things like MFA resets on video calls going and it not being them. We're going to have to rely on multiple factors. We're going to have to potentially for a bit go to make sure people have to go and do this in person. I think but the main thing is people being aware of any kind of communications or channels coming from outside the organization, outside the perimeter.
So, what advice would you give a CISO today who says, Jeff, I am worried about deepfakes, misinformation, disinformation on my organization? What kind of key takeaways would you tell them?
Well, I think one thing I look at is the organizational controls that allow some of these things to happen, to go wrong. So in the case of the financial director transferring 400 million Hong Kong dollars, I guess there should have been a question around why could the financial director transfer 400 million Hong Kong dollars without there being some kind of circuit breaker or another, like the dual key systems you see again, going back to the old kind of Cold War idioms and spy movies, you see it wasn't one person turning a key to make something happen. It was multiple people turning a key to make people happen. I think there's probably something in there we've talked about the multiple factors, but also making sure that people, because unfortunately people act, going to things like the misinformation and disinformation and some of and talking about how people react to videos and things like that, is people react in haste when there's fear or pressure or appeals to authority put against them. What can you do to make them put the brakes on that and to involve another person in that equation? So anything that's really business critical.
Mm-hmm. And also things like training, security awareness, doing things like live deepfakes help, and they're also a lot of fun, but also things like threat modeling as well, which I'd like to just take a moment and a segue, a big shout to our sponsors of this episode, Northstar Intelligence, from ideas to impact, an AI that works for people. They actually do provide things like awareness training about AI security and do threat modeling for people about AI risks in organizations. So if that's something you are interested in, do check out the show notes for Northstar Intelligence and see how they can help you today. If you found anything we've discussed in this episode scary at all and you want to take that off your worry list, Northstar Intelligence, thank you again for being our sponsors and allowing us to bring this show to the audience for free. So what strikes me about this conversation today, Jeff, which I'm sure a lot of our cybersecurity listeners are going to be thinking, just another thing to add to the list of things we have to deal with. You know, the technological threat is already an arms race. And now we've got a very people-centric, like it's messy, isn't it? This is a very messy threat because it deals with the human factor immensely. Because it sounds to me, from what we've discussed, that technological controls in place, they aren't there yet. They might not be there for a while. Things like the C2PA process, for example, it's voluntary. It has a lot of flaws. Can't really rely on that. Contextually, it's very hard to meet people where they are in terms of, you know, if someone's already been convinced by something, actually breaking down that belief is very, very difficult. It's basically the same principle of, you make an impression about someone in the first few seconds and it's very hard to change that impression. It takes a lot of work to change that impression. Deepfakes and receiving any misinformation or disinformation also has a lot of that kind of hard work to decouple that once you've seen it, heard it, felt it. So this is very much just a psychological, maybe even philosophical problem that cybersecurity teams have to deal with, which can be very difficult if your team is made up of mostly technologists. I guess, what is our parting words of advice here?
Okay, going back to what we mentioned earlier from the old idiom from the Soviets, trust but verify. And in the modern context, it's zero trust but always verify. Think about how you build up that organizational chain of trust and verification, making sure that you don't leave any holes in which people can get in and use some of these techniques to actually spoof your members of staff and to get around your security controls, and make sure there's always things in place to stop people from doing stuff in haste that they can't easily undo.
I guess my final question to you, Jeff, is: are you really Jeff Watkins?
No, I'm not.
And am I really Leanne Potter?
No, I'm not. No.
And is this really compromising positions, or did we just run our voices through 11 labs and get an AI script to generate this? Which I have noticed a lot of my podcasts that I do enjoy have started doing that, and it drives me bonkers. Please note, dear listeners, we will never do that to you just because we're really tight as well. Not worth the credits.
Tell you what, they'd make the podcast a whole lot easier to edit if the AI just did it all in one take without making any mistakes. So there's some upsides to it.
What do you mean edit, Jeff? There is no editing here. It
Well,
all comes out exactly
Well,
perfect.
I get edited. You're perfect every time. I get edited.
It's just me spreading misinformation, disinformation. This was the second part of our mini-series of how technology has ruined your life, where today we looked at how AI changes what we believe. Last episode, we looked at how AI just needs to convince you and persuade you. What happens in part 3? What have I told you for our next episode that I think you have the most amazing idea? I don't think anyone has had for an episode the most brilliant idea. Nobody's done it. You're going to make so much money with this episode. Honestly, it's going to be fantastic. It's going to go all the way. You are so unique with this approach to this idea.
Are you being sycophantic, Leanne?
I am, because isn't that the premise of the next episode
Yeah.
about how technology ruins your life?
Yeah, it's called Your Biggest Fan. It's about sycophancy, confirmation bias, and machines that always agree with you. Because a sycophantic AI can become an accidental insider threat. It may validate things like really bad code that's insecure. It might review things and go, this is fine. Or it may try and make decisions in the case of agentic AI just because it's optimized to be helpful, reassuring, or agreeable rather than challenging what you're trying to do. And I think it's an interesting angle on the fact that AI, while powerful, is designed and fine-tuned to be agreeable to us, the human users.
Which we're seeing in stories. A recent story came out about some developers who literally just asked the AI agent for the API keys for the production environment they were working in, and to be nice and helpful, the AI agent happily gave those up. So that's what you're going to be learning about in the next episode, about the cybersecurity risks and general organizational dangers of sycophantic AI. Looking forward to it. But before we leave, remember, it's not only just about these AIs, it's about the human in the loop. And so you have to ask yourself, am I the compromising position here?